Hi everybody, it's Brad from B&T Catfishing Adventure. Today we're doing something different, and this segment is called We Be Fishing. That's right, it's a podcast, and we're going to start doing some podcasts from time to time. And the podcast, while We Be Fishing is a different name, it's still part of, it's a branch off of B&T Catfishing Adventure. All right, this allows you to know that this is the podcast and that it's not a regular episode, a live episode, or so on and so forth. It's something where we're going to come in here and talk on different subjects from time to time. Now, today we're going to talk about a subject that some of you love on our channel and maybe some of you not so much. We're going to talk about jug fishing, the history of jug fishing, and how to jug fish, what is jug fishing, and so on and so forth. Now, this is going to be a two-part segment podcast because the subject matter is so long. So we're going to do this podcast today, and then very soon the second episode of this podcast will come out to wrap this whole thing up. All right? So there you go. We Be Fishing is now part of the podcast section of B&T Catfishing Adventure here on YouTube. So let people know. Also, be sure to share this with other people so they can get in on this as well. All right, jug fishing. What the heck is jug fishing? Well, jug fishing has been around for a long time. Now, some people love it again, and some people hate it. Some people will tell you it's not actually fishing. Well, it is a form of fishing, and that's why it's also covered by rules and regulations in many states. Now, let's be real. In some states, you cannot jug fish. It's illegal. So if you're thinking about it, be sure to check all your state laws, rules, and regulations, as we like to tell you on anything new like that. Be sure to check out and make sure you're in compliance with all the rules within your state. And we wouldn't want to get you in trouble in any way, shape, or form. But jug fishing has been around for a long time. It's very popular and has been popular for years and years and years, especially down south. All right, so jug fishing. Well, it gets its name from the use. A lot of times lines were tied to some old jugs and so on and so forth, and they were thrown out with, the hooks and bait and all this type of stuff in hopes of catching fish. Now, let's be real. Fishing at one time was not necessarily a sport. It was survival. This is what people did to eat on a daily basis many times. Especially in areas where they had big bodies of water and so on and so forth, if you lived on the river. Now, my family dates back before Prohibition, which, was 1920, so on and so forth. They lived in the 1900s, way back in a small town called Calhoun, Kentucky. Now, this was my dad's family. He was born up down there along the Green River. Now, so many times families, especially during Prohibition, the Depression time period and things like that, they were hard up for food. Now, two great ways and quick ways to harvest fish is the easiest one, of course, is trot lines. Running a trot line is the easiest way to catch fish. You put those baits out, many times the night before on these hooks, on these lines. You leave them out, some cases you're leaving them out 24 hours. But you're putting them out there for many hours. So anytime you got a baited up hook or several of them, you got 25, 50, 100 something hooks baited up, you're going to catch fish. You don't have to be an expert at catching fish to catch fish running trot lines, right? Anybody can do that. So there you go. Now, jug fishing also is pretty simple. You throw your jugs out in an area where you hope you're going to be able to find them tomorrow once the fish grabs them, so on and so forth. And we'll tell you different ways how to do that. But it was all about finding food for your family at one time. All right? So it was catching fish to feed the family. So let's not get that mistaken. This tradition, which is for many people now a sport, and for some people it is now there's jug fishing tournaments out there. All right, so it is definitely evolved. It's grown into something that is for the whole family. Now, at one time, these farmers that lived out there, and people during the Depression and even before that, they were hard up on food. They would set these jugs out either at night or early in the morning. They may farm during the day on their own farm, or work for somebody else trying to make some money and get some food in the house and so on and so forth. But then they would go tend their lines, all right, whether they're trot lines or jugs or whatever. So they take their small boats out, and they go out and they will retrieve these jugs, and bring back whatever it was they caught. Now, obviously, they're going to catch different things other than just catfish. Catfish was the primary target fish, but they were going to keep basically whatever they caught. Because if that's all you got, that's what you're eating. So, whether it's a drum or a gar or whatever, that's what you're eating. So that was what was on the menu for that night. Now, jugs, like we said, jugs were on there with lines and so on and so forth. People have used empty tin cans, and they'll tape them together or hook them together, and they would put lines on them and so on and so forth. Now, today, things are different. Today, primarily, what you're using is PVC pipe. A lot of times they'll have caps on the end of it, and they can be various size. I mean, depends on where you're fishing. If you're fishing little ponds and so on and so forth, you don't need, obviously, great big jugs. Now, some people will fish very small noodles, all right, pool noodles, all right, is what these are. So they're the PVC pipe covered with pool noodle, right, and it can be smaller in dimension and length, or you can step up to the bigger one. Now, here's a bigger one, and a type that me and Miss Tammy used a lot for a long time right here. It's a little dirty, as you can see. It's been out there. It's been used several times. But now, for the river, we use an even larger one. Okay, so this is longer. Sometimes, it's definitely thicker, as you can see from this one as far as dimensions. So it's going to hold these fish up a lot better. They're going to be able to take it down, but, if it stays hooked up, stays buttoned up, these jugs will, or noodles, I'm going to call them both, so bear with me, they will bring that fish back up to the area where this thing floats, because the resistance, they've just got to give into that pull, and it's going to keep pulling as long as this thing's underwater. So there you go. Now, these things, you put some nice line on these. Sometimes they're weighted inside, and the reason for that is you lay these out here with a weight down at this end more so. When the fish hits this end, the weight slides down, standing this up. Now, that works, but there are times when you've got waves and stuff, especially from boats out there, wake boats and all this, and you're going to get a false rating, because that's going to tip. If the current's strong, wind's strong, it's going to tip, that's going to slide, it's going to stand up, there's going to be no fish there. So that's the one thing I don't like about the weighted jugs, internal weights in the jugs. All right. Now, a lot of times people will decide to weight these jugs on the bottom. So your jug's floating there, and they're floating in a general vicinity. They have a little bit of slack on them. So the fish has some room, little resistance, until they get that big heavy weight. Now, a lot of times people will take little foam cups, and they will fill them with cement and put a little hook on there to clamp your line to. So these jugs are not going anywhere. There's, you're literally got, a couple pounds or so maybe of weight holding this jug in an area. Now, that does make it much easier to find your jug once you come out and do that. Me and Miss Tammy, we although we don't have to do this in our state, we are allowed to keep these jugs out for 24 hours. They must be checked within that time period. However, we, for the most part, pretty well stay in a visual line of sight with these jugs. Now, for some states, you have to do that all the time. You have to stay in the line of sight of your jug. But we don't always do that. We might run down the river for a second or wherever and come right back. We don't like to leave the fish on there long. A couple reasons is we're generally not keeping the fish, so we don't want to stress these fish out, and we don't want them to die. We return back to them because we're usually doing it for fun and entertainment purposes. All right, so we want to get back to those jugs quickly. We want to get the fish off, show them to you guys, and then we're going to release them back in the water as quickly as possible. So what we do is we don't have them weighted to the bottom. We do put a little bit of weight on here, just like you would maybe your regular line. We'll run leader lines sometimes on here as well, with swivels to make sure the line doesn't tangle up or twist, and so on and so forth. But the weight we put down sometimes slows it down when we have it in the river. We just put a half ounce or something like that on it, very, very light, maybe an ounce worth of weight. Now, you may put more depending on where you're at, depending on the current and the type of fishing. We like to let these things drift. All right, so we're covering more water looking for the fish. All right, so if we've got them out on the river, we're wanting them to drift, to cover, and basically be in search of the fish, just like you would if you were running planer boards and you're drifting, baits or something like that. Same principle. Okay, so there's more work involved when you're doing things like this. You're looking for those, you're watching them, you're chasing them, you're putting them the right depth length, because you don't want them necessarily setting on bottom. You want them up off the bottom. So you've got to do your work. You've got to do your homework out there. Find out what the depth is of the river, the lake, or wherever you're fishing. You're keeping that bait up off the bottom. Even as it goes down through there, you've got to make sure that bait is going to be off the bottom from the lowest point that your bait is going to pass over. Okay, very important. Or you're going to get snagged, tied up, tangled, whatever. You want to do that. You can drag bait off or whatever, and you don't want to lose your bait. It's hard to catch fish when you don't have any bait on the hook. So you want to make sure you've got this thing at the right depth. Okay, so again, me and Miss Tammy, we put them out there. We're watching them. We usually check the baits about every 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, somewhere in that range. We'll like to go and do a bait check on these jugs. All right, and it's very successful doing it this way. If you leave them out overnight and your hook gets stripped, well, it's stripped. It's not rebaited. You're going to get what you get the next day. Now, in our state, we're allowed up to 50 jugs. So you figure, okay, you're going to catch something on one of those if it's out for 24 hours. However, I've seen days where you come through these 20 minutes later and most every one of them have been stripped. So if that being the case, over a 24-hour period, you may have one fish in 50 jugs. It just depends. And then sometimes we're hooking them up like this. It just depends on the fish, the bait, the size of the fish, how hungry they are, and so on. So there you go. We put a little bit of weight on it, keeps the bait hanging down and not drifting back behind it. Okay, we keep it up off the bottom as we let our jugs drift down. Now, if we're in a cove or something of that nature, obviously they're going to stay in that spot wherever you place them at. All right, so there you go. All right, so the jugs today being used, PVC pipe, foam. You put your line on them. You put your bead on, your barrel swivel on it. You run your monofilament. You put your hook on there. You bait them up. Put them in the water. Let them drift. Now, again, check all your state rules, laws, and regulations, and find out what is legal in your state when doing jug fishing. Now, again, The history of jugs, been around a long time in this country. It's evolved from the old jugs or milk jugs. Even when we turned into plastic jugs, a lot of people would use the big milk jug, right? Gallon milk jugs. Some people will use, Coca-Cola plastic bottles, if they're fishing for those smaller fish. It just depends on what you're after. Anything floating like that would work. Now, again, to be in compliance, we have to put our fishing identification number on our jugs. And some states make you put your address and your name and all this type of stuff. So again, please, please, please be in compliance if you're thinking about getting out and doing some jug fishing. It's a great way to catch fish. Now, the whole family can get out there and take part on this. When you use a rod, it's all on you, right? And there's experience there, but there's a certain level of experience needed or knowledge needed for jugs. Knowing what bait these things want, knowing the depth of where you're fishing at. Of course, you got to be able to know how to get out there safely. If these things are over to the bank, you got to maneuver in. If they pull them under some brush and things like that. A lot of times a hook is needed to retrieve these or reach in and grab them and pull them out, and so on and so forth. You may want to use your net many times to get these in when they're super large, so you don't break the line trying to lift these fish up if you don't have a grips or something like that. So jugs are a lot of fun. You can make them up, you can bait them, you can let your fishing partner set them out there. You can let a child, your teenager start pulling them in by hand, and a younger child maybe dip them up in the net. The whole family can get involved, even catching the one fish. So you've done it together as a team. Whether you're taking some of these home to cook up, or whether you're just out for a day of fun on the water, jug fishing is a blast when you're out there chasing these noodles around and trying to bring in the big ones, folks. There you go. All right, we'll talk more about jug fishing tomorrow. There's so much more to talk about. And so on the next segment of We Be Fishing, right, which again is part of the B&T Catfishing Adventures channel, we're going to wrap it up talking about jugs a little bit more, some other things you're going to need to learn or know to get out there and to be super successful when out jug fishing. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Be able to, help us out here. Be sure to give us a thumbs up. Share this podcast with your friends. Let them know about it and help us continue to grow the channel. Folks, as always, we appreciate you. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't done that. And we hope to see you very soon, me and Miss Tammy, either in the boat or on the bank. You guys take care. We'll see you next time.